I'd like now to invite to the stage Karen Yanis, who will introduce our expert panel. Karen is Executive Director of the Crown Family Philanthropies, and prior to this, she was Executive Director of the Oprah Winfrey Foundation. She's currently Vice Chair of the Donors Forum and is a President's Circle member at the Council. Karen.
Good evening. As Joe mentioned, my name is Karen Yanis. I'm the Executive Director of Crown Family Philanthropies here in Chicago, and I'm really honored to introduce tonight's Women in Global Development Forum panel. And I'm also honored to be here in front of so many people who, on Martin Luther King Day, and on one of the coldest days of the year so far, and on Inauguration Day, have decided to turn out to hear this. I think this is a really important conversation that you'll find very meaningful. Tonight's discussion will cover new territory for the forum. They haven't done this before. Judging by the size of the audience, I'm sure you'll agree that human trafficking is an issue that needs to be addressed in a forum like this. The term human trafficking is complex, and it conjures many, many disturbing images: slave labor, sex trade, forced marriage, and domestic servitude. These are not concerns of the past alone, but problems that are growing in scope today. The estimated global annual profits made from the exploitation of all human trafficking globally is $31.6 billion. And on Somaly Mom's website, they note about $10 billion of that is through sex trafficking globally alone. Trafficking is not limited to the developing world. It's happening in our own backyard as well. The Center for Missing and Exploited Children reports that over 100,000 children are victims of commercial sexual trafficking in the US alone. And in 2011, the National Human Trafficking Resource Center hotline reported that more than 19,000 calls came in from women seeking a way out. People have been grappling with solutions to the question about human trafficking for hundreds and hundreds of years. In the 12th century, the sage Maimonides prioritized freeing captives over all other kinds of good deeds. He said, "The ransom of captives takes precedence over the sustenance of the poor and clothing them, for a captive falls into the category of those who are hungry and thirsty, and those who are naked, and those who stand in danger of losing their lives." The despicable acts of captors and the torturous results on women and girls and boys is difficult to listen to and really hard to digest sometimes. But that's not all there is. Through the work of committed, caring people like Somaly Mom and agencies like UNICEF and Heartland Alliance, victims of trafficking can tap into a resilience that allows formerly captive people to regain their soul. As one young woman says in the film, The Road to Traffic, which you can find on Somaly's website. It's a 12-minute film that is really worth watching. In his book of essays, Notes of a Native Son, James Baldwin pondered the question of slavery when he wrote, "The wonder is not that so many are ruined, but that so many survive." I hope that you find this discussion really disturbing, but also catalytic, and that it inspires you to think about the resilience that can happen through your involvement and your support. There are bios on your seats of our speakers, so I'll just give a brief introduction of each one and invite them to come up. Our first panelist is Susan Bissell. Susan is the Chief of Child Protection in the Program Division at UNICEF. She oversees UNICEF's efforts on children affected by armed conflict and their child protection systems, and much more. Our next panelist is Somaly Mom. Somaly is the co-founder and president of the Somaly Mom Foundation. Mom herself is the survivor of many years of captivity in Cambodia. And Somaly has aided tens of thousands of women and girls in knowing their rights and escaping their plight and in just becoming human again. And in that video, she's referred to as a ray of hope and a mother figure for many girls who have no hope and really need support as they move out of captivity and into freedom. Finally, tonight's discussion will be led by Scott Portman. Scott is the Director of International Programs at Heartland Alliance International, and Heartland is based in Chicago and a wonderful organization here. He's designed and implemented projects to address human trafficking in Iraq, Jordan, and Syria. Following the formal discussion, Joe will return to the podium to open up the floor to audience questions. And again, up in the balcony, we hope to see some from the students. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Susan Bissell, Somaly mom, and Scott Portman to the Chicago Council of Global Affairs.
Well, I guess we'll do oh good, the mic seems to be working. That's great. Well, it's really impressive to see so many people here tonight and so many people engaged and interested in this subject, in this horrible crime that affects so many people worldwide. As was mentioned, human trafficking is a multi-billion-dollar industry across the world. It's a form of modern-day slavery. It's also appropriate to say today on Inauguration Day that President Obama has declared January the month for prevention of human trafficking and slavery. And the human trafficking and slavery over the last decade has become a very, very major part of U.S. foreign policy and U.S. development assistance, to the point that many countries' development assistance is tied to progress in addressing human trafficking. It's a particular area of interest for Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. But we should talk a little bit about what trafficking is first before we ask a few questions. The sort of international law framework for trafficking is the UN protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, which has been agreed to by countries throughout the world and sort of provides a legal framework for what trafficking is and some ideas on how to address it. Trafficking in persons, most of us have an idea of forced prostitution or perhaps chattel slavery, where somebody's actually physically held and then sold from one person to another to perform some duty. But human trafficking is a somewhat wider sort of phenomena. There's lots of forms of coerced labor that can take place, and lots of reasons why labor is coerced. So human trafficking basically requires three things. It requires some sort of an act. In other words, somebody has to recruit or transport or harbor or transfer or purchase somebody, another human being. And it requires a means. This is done through coercion or fraud or force or some form of trickery or some sort of, up to and including physical force. And for a particular purpose, for some form of exploitation. So people may be exploited for sex. The sex trade, obviously, probably sex trafficking is, as we've already heard, probably the single largest income earner for traffickers and one of the most prevalent forms of trafficking. But it can also be for labor. There was a recent study where fully 50% of the domestic servants in the Middle East fit the UN definition for trafficking. You know, they'd been coerced, they weren't being paid wages, and they were being forced to work, and their passports were taken from them. And it can include relatively rare forms of exploitation, such as organ removal. And it can also include something as as intimate and that shades into areas of gender-based violence, such as forced marriage. So a woman that is forced, or a girl typically, who's forced to marry somebody else against her will, and her labor and her value is transferred to somebody else, maybe for a bride payment, maybe for not, but her labor is then exploited by somebody else, and she doesn't consent to this. That itself is a form of human trafficking. So, as we've said, the geographic distribution is worldwide. It happens in the United States, happens around the world, in almost every country. And another thing that's important to remember about human trafficking is that the victims tend to be the most vulnerable people in the society. So in societies where women don't have rights or don't have equal rights, women and girls tend to be very vulnerable to human trafficking. The people with mental or physical disabilities can be vulnerable to trafficking. And here in the United States, people who are non-English speakers, who are immigrants that maybe don't have immigration status, are also very vulnerable to trafficking. And their immigration status can be used as a form of coercion against them to force them to work. And likewise, the traffickers themselves are equally diverse. We've already mentioned that it could be family members. You know, parents can traffic children into either forced sexual exploitation, which happens frequently throughout the world, or into forced marriages or into domestic servitude, or even sell them outright out of desperation or because of some problem with the family. Sometimes people in the immigrant community can exploit other people in the immigrant community without even fully realizing the extent to which they're breaking the law. Persons who hire domestic servants can exploit them. And of course, organized crime is deeply involved in human trafficking throughout the world. So it's a major revenue earner for organized crime. It's important to mention the difference between organized crime or human trafficking and people smuggling. People cross borders around the world and they pay coyotes or whoever to do this, to get them across borders. The simple act of paying somebody to get you across a border or smuggling a person does not rise to the level of trafficking because it doesn't imply the means, in other words, coercion or fraud, and it doesn't include the purpose, the exploitation of labor. So I think that also as we think about human trafficking, we should separate it a little bit in our minds from the issue of undocumented immigration, either in the United States or between countries around the world. So I think with that, we'll ask a couple questions. The last thing I wanted to say is that most anti-trafficking programs around the world and most policy focuses on protection of trafficking victims, prevention of human trafficking, and prosecution of traffickers. So with that, maybe we'll start with a question for Susan Bissell. Susan, maybe you can tell us what the specific role is of UNICEF's Protection Division in terms of developing global strategies.
So UNICEF's protection section sits within what's called Program Division in UNICEF, and what that really implies is boots on the ground in 150 countries around the world. And those boots on the ground, or those colleagues of mine who are in those field offices, are governed by a strategy that we have that privileges two pieces of work and that are relevant to what you've just so aptly described. And the first of those is strengthening child protection systems, which is all about preventing trafficking from ever happening to begin with, strengthening the outreach of social welfare workforces, working with police and others in the legal community and law enforcement, making sure that laws and policies are in place to protect children from ever being trafficked to begin with. As an aside there, if I may, one of the things that we find challenging and really unexplainable is the fact that there remain many countries in the world and many states in the United States that don't have legislation in place to protect child victims of trafficking from being treated as criminals when they're rescued. A very simple act of legislation and allocating some resources and implementing would make that so much easier. Back to the main part of the question. The second thing that we're working on in protection is addressing social norms, addressing things that happen within societies and communities that perpetuate violence against children or their exploitation. And trafficking and addressing attitudes towards trafficking is relevant in this regard because of attitudes towards children and women. And that really is a norm that has to change in many societies. Another relevant sort of indicator, you use this example of early marriage, but early marriage is a social norm in many communities, or marrying children off. And it's a borderline, I think, between trafficking and sale, because we have another international protocol which talks about sale, prostitution, and pornography. So I think you were rightly pointing out there are some important distinctions. In our protection work, we're trying to address the underlying aspects of society and working with local community leaders and activists, faith-based organizations to address harmful social norms, while at the same time we're working on the system, on the laws and policies, and some of the more traditional parts of the formal system.
And Somaly, you have experience with victims of trafficking in Cambodia and in Southeast Asia. First off, are the conditions for women in Cambodia, have they improved over time? And second off, is there anything, are there changes in the attitudes toward women in Cambodia that might be useful in combating human trafficking?
Yeah, since right now more than 10 years in Cambodia right now is changing. Of course, we work also with UNICEF, and UNICEF make a good job, you know, that you set up the police, anti-trafficking police, which whom we can work with. And right now, our governments officially, they recognize that we have the traffic in Cambodia. So they even set up like 12 December is Trafficking Day, and then we celebrate it to let the people know aware about the trafficking. We have law enforcement in 2008, implemented right now. So we have, it's working. So right now it's improving, but you know what is improving? What, like myself, I'm on the field work. I want to have like law, like very fast, something, everything so fast. For us, like it's improving, but it's not much as we want.
And the U.S. recently passed a law. The U.S. has a law now that criminalizes abroad if U.S. men go to Cambodia, for example, for sex tourism and exploit children, that they can be held criminally liable if the U.S. finds out about it, if there's some way to get that information to U.S. authorities. Do you think that that's had an effect? Is that known in Cambodia? And if so, do you think it's had any effect?
Yeah, I think that is a question for Suzanne. Because I work for the local people, for Cambodian people. You know, we always talking about pedophile. But pedophile is small part in Cambodia. Most of the clan are Cambodian, Asia. So all my work is saving the girl and then try to make our men to understand, try to make our men to respect the women, try to educate our men and our women in Cambodia. So I think the question going to Suzanne better than me, that I don't know.
Well, I just think this aptly points out the sort of bookends, the way UNICEF and organizations like Somaly's work, that important work at the community level, and then this sort of more systemic work, if I can put it that way. I can't speak to the statistics on Cambodia specifically, but I will say that the extraterritorial legislation of the United States is among the best in the world. And I think you probably have the track record for the most convictions in this regard. And we're certainly advocating for more of the same in other countries, but we don't see it everywhere.
And I just think that you all have to be proud of your country, because the US are the first country are very reacting on the trafficking. We work very well with the embassy in Cambodia, and your government very react. That I think maybe sometimes US have to be like good example for other countries in Europe, example.
And do you think the U.S. directs enough resources toward prosecution of this, or is there some public policy thing that we could do in the United States to push this forward a little bit more?
Well, you asked the question at a very interesting time, because, and you can tell I'm a foreigner, I'm about to say the United States, again, the U.S. Just before Christmas, a national plan of action for children in adversity was launched out of the White House. And for those of us working in child protection, we're watching this with great interest. And what it requires is that the 7 U.S. government departments that work on orphan and vulnerable children, including the GTIP office, the Trafficking in Persons office, are meant to be coordinating their work better in order that they're more effective overseas. Concurrent with that is an effort to grow a global alliance in child protection, which brings me swiftly to the issue of resources. And it wouldn't matter if I was sitting in my home country of Canada here or somewhere in Europe, I'd say the same thing. We do not put enough resources in prevention. We put resources in law enforcement and border control, and that's very important. But if we don't stem the flow, if we don't really understand what's happening in the villages and communities that Somaly's working in, and invest there in the creation of alternative livelihoods, better education to a higher level, education that's appropriate, and so on. There are so many things that you can tell I'm passionate about this, because I think we've put a lot on one side and we have precious few convictions, and we've put very, very little on the preventative side. So that is certainly a plea I would make to any government that would listen.
Well, that's interesting, because it does seem like it's both a development issue and a protection issue, sort of simultaneously. Now, how do you balance those two things, Somaly? How do you balance, in Cambodia, trafficking is spawned by poverty and by parents that have no choices in the matter, and by women and girls that are vulnerable because of lack of opportunity and lack of resources. But how do you prioritize between development and then the protection work that has to be done?
So what is my prioritize? For me, if today I can save one girl, that is great. I can save them and then, make them able life, that they can go to school, they can be happy, that they can have psychology, because somewhere, a lot of people are just thinking about the numbers, but myself, I just thinking about life, human being, one life. So I always prioritize on saving ones and help them to be out of everything. It's mean like, sometimes you can take 5 minutes to save the girl. It's easy. You go to the brothel, 5 minutes, you save them. After saving them, what are you going to do with them exactly? Mm-hmm. So you have to take like 5 years, 10 years, entire life. It's like each of you, when you have your own kid, you work entire life to helping them. How about this kid? They need the same thing. So the kid, they're like my own kid. I spend my entire life, like now nearly 20 years that I work with them. Some of them, they stay with me. They go to university, second year of law school, and they still with me. First year of psychology, they still with me. So my priority always on the education girl. And then we work with other NGO because I'm not lonely and by my own. We have many NGO who work on cooperation. Some of them, they are specialized on economics. Some of them, they are specialized on preventing. Some of them, we have many, but my work is specialized on how to save girls from the sex industry. Like I tell you, I know how to fight with the pimp. I don't know how to make economic better. I don't know.
Well, that begs a question. How do you fight with the pimps?
That I know. I'm going to the brothel, try to saving one. When the pimp come to me, I know one thing: run, run. If not, you have been killed by them. You have to run. Forget everything, run. And then after you go to the police, you go to the people, and then you can come back. But don't fight with them when they have gun. If you are clever, save your life first.
Well, sometimes this can be a little dangerous in some situations. I mean, are the people that manage the prostitution trade in Cambodia, are they related to organized crime? Do they have threats against activists? And if they do, do you have some way of obtaining protection from the Cambodian government so that you're not being threatened?
I always tell that my life, I have been born alone and die alone, and everyone going to die, right? And then one thing in your life, what you want your life to be. So I have been suffering in my life, entire of my life. I never forget what I have been through. I close my eyes, I see everything. I'm going to the brothel, I look at the kid, at their eyes, I know what they need from me. So for me, saving them, give them love and hug, and safe place. And then they have hope, and then they can laughing as a kid again. That is the best place. And then, if you are scared of dying, what you going to do? What you going to do? So my life is like, I'm happy if I'm die for a good cause. But right now they cannot kill me because I have many Somali in Cambodia, many people working. And then, of course, I have been protected by my team from the US. They set up for me bodyguard, but I'm the worst one. I never need a bodyguard. I always go somewhere by my own too. I'm the worst one. And the government, they try to protect me, but I have also like UNICEF, like State Department, like I have many people who try to protect myself. So with all their voice, it makes my government a little bit like pressure. So I'm a bit safe. But girl, if they want to kill you, they kill you.
Well, in the Middle East, oftentimes if a woman is trafficked or a girl is trafficked in sex trafficking, her family will reject her, and she may be at risk not only of the traffickers, but of her very own family. And a persistent problem is re-trafficking. Whoops, was that me? Well, a persistent problem sometimes is re-trafficking, that women will be saved from it or pulled out of it or provided an opportunity to escape, or they escape themselves, but then the options are so limited for them, they get stuck back into it again. They get recruited again or tricked again or whatever. Is this a common pattern in Southeast Asia or in Cambodia?
Yes, of course. I try to explain everyone that you can take 5 minutes to save them. After 5, what are you going to do with them? So our work is like, first of all, when the girl come to the center, you know that they have been suffering. So you have things to teaching them. So I always teaching my girl, what we have been through, we cannot forget it. But what we learn, to forgive it, to accept it. Because sometimes you try to run away from your story that you have been raped, you have been sold in brothel, or your mother sold you, or you hate your mother. For me, I don't want my girl to hate anyone else, even their own mother who sold them, because we don't know what their mother have been through too. Their mother, maybe they have been raped, she have been raped, beating all time by the husband who was alcoholic. So when the girl come, I always teaching them forgiveness and accept it that they have been sold, we have been abused. And what else? Now, we have opportunity, we try to stand up, go for education. You have opportunity now. Feel that you are lucky that you are saved. That at the same time, many girls still in a brothel, they can die in a brothel. So take the opportunity, going to education, learn from that and helping other girls. So right now we have like our staff, 30% of our staff are survivors from sex slave. We have our entire Voice for Change. It's under Somaly Mom Foundation, 100% of them are survivors from sex slavery. So right now they're going to the village, they have their own radio talk show. They try to educate the parents. So we go to the village, educate the parents, don't sell your kid by, but we bring you solution. It means like we bring you the small business. And then we set up the business for you. We do it with you. We come every month to see you and helping you. So that is the kind that we have to, we have to be very optimistic. If you see all the problem, you go, you run away, who's going to suffer? It's a girl who's going to suffer. Why don't we stand up and then do something very soft but very strong, and then showing the people what you're doing for this girl. And then also this girl, they're so clever. You know what they have been through, they're always happy. They're always happy to have a new life, happy to go to school, happy to continue their life. And then they are one of example to all the girls. Even right now in the brothel, that, I still go into the brothel every time. And we have our survivor from sex slavery. She tell me, Somaly, my life, I have been dying inside. So I'm not surviving, but I'm happy. I want to save others. So she go into the brothel, try to empower this woman to escape, because sometimes you can save their body, but their mind not. So empower them. And last year, one of my girls, she empowered 30 women escape from the brothel.
Susan, I wanted to follow up on something you said earlier. You talked about the coordination, the need for more coordination within the U.S. government, and the fact that they're trying now to coordinate all these diverse agencies. But there's also a whole alphabet soup of UN agencies. UNDOC, UNHCR, UNICEF, which takes a major, the lead role in child protection, but also in humanitarian assistance. OCHA. Is there a mechanism within the UN for coordinating anti-trafficking work or trafficking prevention?
Actually, there are two mechanisms, but let me just correct one little thing. I didn't observe there was not enough coordination in the U.S. government. They observed it all by themselves.
Oh, good.
Just for the record. Never to be critical in a host country. There are two mechanisms, one of which I would say is more effective than the other. So there's something called UN GIFT, the Global Fight Against Trafficking, which is a number of UN agencies and non-government organizations that have come together to try to coordinate their efforts. And I'd say it's been successful from the point of view of advocacy and holding meetings and really drawing attention to things. But for me, the more effective mechanism within the UN is an interagency coordination team, which UNICEF chairs this year, but the chair rotates each year. And it's made up of UNODC, of UNFPA, ILO, ourselves, and a few others. And basically, we bring our action plans to the table and coordinate those. And the one thing about UNICEF that's different than the others is that we have a field presence. So we're even able to take not only our own strategy, but the strategies and the work of the other agencies out through the field, and to working with organizations like Somalis. As you say, the coordination, I'd say at a global level, it's effective. How it works out on the ground very much depends on the individuals who are there, on the UN resident coordinator, and others. Again, we're privileged to have people in every country where we are. We have country offices that are established in about 190 countries now, 150 of them with protection programs. The other, I think, interesting thing about the coordination is the longevity of UNICEF in the field. I was saying to someone earlier that we sort of have this privileged access with government who will sit and talk. And I think this goes back, some of you may remember Jim Grant when he was our executive director. And he would travel around the world and meet the leaders of these countries. And he always traveled with an oral rehydration salt packet in his pocket. And he was able to meet any leader, any world leader that he wanted to sit with. And on the tails of his successful 3-year tenure as our executive director, and then Carol Bellamy, and then Ann Veneman, and now Tony Lake, we've somehow maintained this credibility in the field, if I can put it that way, that gives us access to government. When I got to India in 2001, and I left in 2004, one of the things that was on my mind to do in India as the head of protection was to try in my own modest way with our team on the ground there, mostly national staff, to get the government of India to address the domestic trafficking. India is a country of countries, and there's a terrific amount of trafficking within the national borders, and no one wanted to talk about it in government. It would imply you had to do something about it, you would have to allocate resources and so on. And with the work of a lot of organizations like Somali Moms on the ground in India, and our own organization and others, we were actually able to influence and have a discussion with both national government and local government to address this particular issue. I'm not claiming any personal responsibility whatsoever, but just to say that in terms of UN coordination and access, in terms of child trafficking, the access of UNICEF on the ground, I think, is second to none vis-a-vis those formal contacts. A lot more can always be done to coordinate, there's no question. In humanitarian context, not to get into the nitty-gritty, but the UN system and its non-government partners divide into a cluster system whenever there's a declared emergency. And UNICEF is the lead of the child protection subcluster. All that means is that when there's a natural disaster, or even in some war-affected contexts, we take the lead in ensuring that all the partners who are trying to address a particular concern join hands. And so the best illustration of this is the earthquake in Haiti. So I don't know how many of you were on the ground in Haiti after the earthquake, but it was a mess. And I don't mean the earthquake. Everybody landed in Haiti to help. And if there was a better time to sort of address issues of preventing trafficking, of family reunification and other things, this was it. And this coordination system that has been put in place by the UN actually helped. Took us a little while to get it going in those tents, but in fact having some of those standard operating procedures in humanitarian context has helped us to be much more effective.
But they really take time. I always try, because I'm from the field work, and then what I see every single day is like all the organized crime, they are very well organized. But the people who work against organized crime, we are a bit mess. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So what we need, when I'm here just try to ask each of you, what we need from all of you, we need coordinations. We need the people in UN, political, everyone who try to, how to empower and being behind the local people, because like myself or other NGO, we working on the field work, we face with corruption, we face with culture, because sometimes that we face to as a woman, we cannot stand up in front of men. We face with organized crime that they can kill us anytime. And we don't know who are organized crime exactly. And then we have, we don't have much people who protecting us. So sometimes we get very tired because we're going, and then we look at behind, and then no one protecting.
Well, I wanted to follow up a little bit on what you said, and I just wanted to compliment UNICEF, because I've noticed certainly over the last 5 years, and maybe over longer, that it's very rare for there to be a humanitarian crisis situation where trafficking doesn't come up within the protection clusters that develop in each of the countries. And there seems to be a much more acute awareness of it across UN agencies. And much really good coordination, at least it's been my experience. And particularly, it's nice. I think UNICEF really deserves a lot of congratulations for that and a lot of recognition. I know that in Haiti, we did some work on the borders, monitoring kids crossing the borders. But there was very seamless coordination with UNICEF in Port-au-Prince as well, and it was really quite something. Somaly, we're going to take questions from the audience soon, but I wanted to ask you, I'm very curious about how you enlist ordinary Cambodians in your work. You know, there's a lot of Cambodians who don't like the fact that women and girls are forced into the sex trade. And there's a lot of Cambodians that, you know, Cambodia's had a rather grim 20th century. And probably there's a lot of people in Cambodia that really are engaged in rebuilding the country after the history of the country recently. How do you go about getting, do you work with Cambodian business people, or do you work with Cambodian, you know, with Buddhist priests or religious people, or do you build a coalition to address this issue?
I work with everyone. We work with, first of all, I have been helped by UNICEF, started at the beginning of my work. The first center in 1997, helped by UNICEF, and then after we work with IOM, we work with all the NGO partnership with the local people. But I remember that it's not easy to take connection with the governments, and then with the people, like the local people. You know, when you work on the sex trafficking, they look at us like very down. And then get to them, I did more like 10 years. Right now we get them with us. So we work with local people, we work with international people, we work with UN. So right now we are very close with UNAIP. So we set up a program that our voice, our survivor, going with them, and then we have like law enforcement, that we're teaching the police, the court, the justice, you know, about how treating the victim from sex trafficking. Because sometimes we saw the police, of course, they are police, and when they accuse the girl from the sex trafficking, and then the first hour, first day, then they want to have statement. So they always ask the girl the question, and then they are victim, they are scared of everything, you know. How you can ask them, how it's important for the statement than life of the girl, put them away. So we work close with everyone, and then I think right now it's better for us to build a relationship, because we get known in Cambodia, and then we have many NGOs that we work with them.
Well, I think you said something that's very interesting culturally in other places as well. Once a woman is forced into prostitution, or a girl, her status in society is dropped even further. And
Yes.
people may discriminate against her, or they may not even want to hear about the issue. So sometimes you can't really easily recruit community allies that well. But it sort of shows that maybe in some situations, this is certainly the case in the Middle East, anything having to do with prostitution is immediately culturally toxic.
We have this problem, sir. When we integrate the girl, example like when we integrate the girl to the society, and then the society or her client come up and say, she was in the brothel. And then the families don't supporting them, because they also look at it that she was in the brothel too. So what's doing? They call us, or some of them, they go back to the brothel, you know. We have this problem. And example like in one of our center, the girl going to school, and all the school, they are very discriminated with our girl. It's like, she from brothel, she have HIV/AIDS. We don't want our kid to go with them. I always teaching my kid, like, be patient, showing them, even you have been sold, even you have been in the brothel, but you are also clever enough. So just like, keeping patient and go and prove them that you are the best in the class. Of course, right now more than 10 years, they are the top in the class. And we can prove it, other people. And we forgive people too, you know. They can tell us anything, what they want to tell. We accept it. Thank you to remind us to be stronger. What we have been through, our experience, we are experts of surviving.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's now about close to 6:45. Maybe we should have some questions.
Okay, what I'd like to do in turning it over to the Q&A from all of you is, if you have a question, please raise your hand. I will call on you and then ask that you wait, please, for one of my colleagues to come to you with the microphone. And in the interest of getting in a lot of... In the interest...
I think maybe that one.
It's Morse code from some trafficker.
I think that one. I don't know how to close it.
I think that's good. Okay.
Not quite sure which ones are on and off right now. But in the interest of getting in several questions, if you could ask a question rather than making a statement, I would really appreciate it. And let's start over here, the lady in the purple with the scarf, please. There's a mic right behind you.
Okay. Hi. I was wondering if you could speak more about deterrence, whether in Cambodia or globally. If the market is that large, what is there to do to determine or to deter the customers?
Deter?
Is it working? There we go. Sorry. It's a great question because frankly, if you added up, and I know someone did this, and I wish I had the data with me, but if you looked at what has been spent on human trafficking over the last 10 years, there are precious few convictions. And I think that, so I wouldn't say that law enforcement is a deterrent right now, or the number of convictions that have been meted out. To come to my comment about social norms, and we haven't measured this as it relates to trafficking, but we have as it relates to early marriage and female genital mutilation and cutting, the deterrent is changing the social norm, is finding that there's some embarrassment in doing this. And let me give you a concrete example from Brazil, where it was quite common, even 5 years ago, to have a child domestic servant. And what has deterred that from happening now are communities of middle-class Brazilians saying, I'm not going to do that. I don't need to do that, mostly because they can afford to pay adults to help them do their domestic work. But changing that acceptance in society in the areas we've looked at has been the strongest deterrent. I know there have been campaigns, and our executive director is talking about something like this right now as relates to violence against women and children, but actually countering the male norm that this is cool, or you're a man if you do this, and somehow getting around that angle. But I think the jury's still out on how successful any of those kinds of campaigns are. I'm sure Somaly, you want to add something there?
I think that it's big. I don't know how to tell you, but trafficking is a big issue that everyone has to be aware of this. Yeah. Because some way, I meet some women here, and they always tell me, talking about trafficking, talking about your life is so heavy. I don't want to talk about that. But she forget it. She forget that what's happened in my country, in myself, is what's happened here in the US recently. And then if you talk to your kid, you educate them, you let the people know, you let them know about this. When something come to them, and then they can see it.
The gentleman in the blue shirt here to the front.
Question. Given the amount of trafficking that seems to go on in Southeast Asia, is it possible that there's
You got it.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. Anyway, as I was saying, do you think it might be possible that the local police themselves might be involved with the trafficking as with some of these other countries, particularly in Eastern Europe?
You want me to go back home safety? I want to go back home.
So,
yes, we have some of police who are corrupted and then who get involved on that. Of course, like I tell again, the organized crime, they don't put here that they are organized crime. You don't know who they are exactly. It might be the people give you money. It might be you staff. It might be the police, might be everyone. Of course, the police get involved. But I don't want to go inside because I want to go back home.
I think also sometimes it's it can be very nuanced in a specific country. So for example, in Iraq, actually the woman who was running a women's shelter actually forced the women in that shelter into prostitution. But one of the people who helped with that problem and intervened was a policeman. And we've also had policemen who have really risked their lives. And so in many countries there's an institutional culture of corruption in which trafficking becomes something integrated within the police forces. But like in 1930 Chicago, there's always some clean cops, And so in each individual country, you've got to work with your allies within the government. You can never totally write off, I think, almost any government.
I would agree with that, but I just want to pick up on your comment about Eastern Europe, because roughly, I guess it was about 5 years ago, we were looking at, I was at a research center in Florence, Italy at the time, and we were looking at trafficking in Europe, East and West. And one of the things that we found was that the shelters for rescued traffic victims in Eastern Europe were empty. And we wanted to find out why. And the reason why was that women and girls didn't want to be rescued because they were afraid of the people that were going to rescue them and the people who were going to be in these shelters. So your point is a relevant one, but not to negate what you've just said, because I completely agree with you.
We'll go farther back. There's a lady here in the black. A second.
Thank you. It's an honor to be in front of you today. My question is in relationship with the United States. I just wonder this, if there's any way of, I don't know, to do some sort of a follow-up for those people who are tourists who go to Cambodia in this case, because in Cambodia the cruelest people who commit cruelest act with children come from the United States. And my other question would be for you, Somaly Mai, is how is your friend who works with you? I understand she also, her daughter was, she disappeared, and they're still working on that and trying to find her. Thanks.
Thank you. You know, you have organization called IGM, Mission
International Justice Mission.
International Justice Mission. They are working on the pedophile. They are specialized on that. And we have also APOL who working on that. We have ACT working on that. My friend who, my best friend, she's still there in Cambodia. She's working. She's well. Thank you. I will tell her that you ask questions. She's good. Even she lose her daughter, but you know, we had to survive. And we had to work to save all the girl. It's not because we lose our kid and then we're sitting and crying. So right now she try to help all the women and girls. Thank you for asking her.
I'd like to ask a question of the student group up in the balcony. And I see a hand up here in the back row. Young man in the back row over to the side. Yes, please.
Thank you. So you mentioned this earlier about the Indian government, but how does an organization like UNICEF deal with governments that are supportive of or indifferent to human trafficking, specifically?
Well, happily, I think we could say now there's no government, and I'm thinking historically, I think that's probably true. So there would be very few, I couldn't name them, governments that wouldn't be willing to have this conversation now. That might not have been the case 5 or 10 years ago, but I think it's a very important question because there are serious human and child rights issues that some governments don't want to talk to us about, and I won't name them here for the same reasons that Somalia doesn't want to talk about Cambodia. I want to be able to go back to New York, but there are, what we do in those cases is we remain in the country for the most part. We're in countries at their invitation. We don't just go in. So we have permission to be there. We do 5-year situation assessments of the situation of children in the country, and we agree on a 5-year plan of action. Now in countries, and I won't name them, but where there are very serious human rights and children's rights abuses, we speak when we can. We rely on other actors in the UN, like the special rapporteurs, or there's a special representative of the Secretary General for children affected by armed conflict. We will turn to her. We will say, we're in this situation, could you come, could you speak, could you say something? There are special rapporteurs on torture and other things. So we try to speak when we can, when we can't, or we can't apply force, we get other actors. At the same time, and I guess it's important to understand why we do this, when we're in a country, we're usually working on the primary health care system, on water and environmental sanitation, on HIV and AIDS, on basic education, and on child protection. And we deem it more important to remain in the country doing something than to be out of the country doing nothing. And we will call and have conversations with Amnesty, with Human Rights Watch, to try to get other voices to speak about things that we can't speak about in order that we can remain. Now, having said that, we're in one country right now, and again, I won't name it, but it's very war affected, and children are being brutally affected. And the only reason we remain is because we're able to deliver humanitarian assistance in the form of food and medical supplies and other things. There's a serious discussion going on about whether we're really effectively delivering those things. Mm-hmm. Are they really getting to where we say they're going? And if that's not the case, then this issue of remaining and not being vocal about what we're seeing, we're weighing that. And we do that constantly. In almost every country, there's a constant weighing of being that right spokesperson and doing something and being at the table. So on the issue of trafficking, I just think there's so much global awareness now, and it's almost like you can't not talk about it. And if you're a signatory to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which almost every country is, this is on the list of things that you will be discussing with the Committee on the Rights of the Child when you go to the committee. So it's common parlance now, and we just have to turn that into real action on the ground. And I want to say one thing, just in case I don't get to say this to you, Somaly, but I feel like the job of everybody else is to make sure that you can go into your retirement not having more girls coming into your center, that we actually stop that from ever happening, because your work is amazing.
Hey, young man up there in the shirt with the writing on it, which I can't read from here. The debate team, this is a debate team guy, a question.
Thank you. So you talked about the UN and the US. Are there ways that the UN and the United States are cooperating or working together on these issues, as opposed to just individually?
I don't understand.
Sure. I mean, we work very closely with all 7 of those U.S. government departments and with the Trafficking in Persons Office. Just to disclose all secrets, the U.S. Definition of trafficking is a little, you could speak to this better than me as a legal person here, but it's a little more nuanced, let's say, than the international definition. And so we're definitely partners and very friendly, but we don't completely agree on that. And we had a big discussion after Haiti, after the earthquake, with the TIP office actually in New York. But for us, it's really important that we adhere to that international definition, because what we're doing with national governments on the ground is domesticating international legislation. So getting those laws and policies turned into national laws and policies. So we've got child labor legislation here. We've got legislation on sale, prostitution, pornography here, trafficking legislation in another basket. Whereas I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but for the United States, there's an awful lot sort of lumped into that trafficking definition, and I think for its applicability here. So the key message is we're strong partners, and we agree to disagree a little bit on some definitional issues.
Well, I feel I should say just a couple of things very quick about the law on trafficking in the U.S. For one thing, one difference is that anybody who's involved in sexual exploitation as a minor who's under the age of 18 is presumed not to be able to give consent, and therefore coercion is presumed. So that's maybe a slight expansion of the definition of trafficking in some ways. Another thing for all you students up there, if you end up writing any papers on trafficking, the Office on Trafficking in Persons at the State Department on their website, they have an annual report where they go through the status of trafficking in every single country around the world. So anybody who's interested in a particular country and wants to sort of find out what the current situation is, that's a really good place to visit.
And the U.S. ranked themselves 2 years ago, right? Was it 2 years ago? Yeah, the United States added themselves, and the international community and China were very happy to see that.
The lady here in the red jacket on the aisle, please.
Thank you, Susan Somaly. This is just wonderful what both of you are doing. Being a trustee of the American India Foundation, I have a question, especially for you, Susan, since you've been in India, and especially what's happened recently, and it's not actually girl-child trafficking, but it's child abuse and rape of a woman. And so my question is, what is the role of social media? Because it seems to me that what happened in India is because young people went out there on the streets because they emailed each other and they, kind of got connected through social media. What is the role of social media, and how is UNICEF working on that? Thank you.
It's a great question, and I think India is an emotional kind of point of reference for many people right now. So I appreciate the question. I think it's also emblematic of many countries where issues of violence against children and women are finally coming to the fore. And I mean, it's a little bit of a bittersweet victory because the price is that young woman who died. I agree with you. We agree with you that social media is very important. We're a bit of a dinosaur as a UN agency that was born after the war. And so we have many young people working with us right now to kind of finesse that the best that we possibly can. We have a Voices of Youth group who work with youth organizations around the world. But social media is an area that we realize, we need to step it up. And if you actually asked me to define it, I probably couldn't. But my 13-year-old at home probably could. But I think you've hit something kind of even more important in the Indian context. It's the combination of social media and the increases in the numbers of, I would say, upper, lower class, and middle class kids who are connected to each other, boys and girls, men and women, in education contexts. And they've become this instant and very powerful fraternity. And I think, we've seen this in the Middle East as well. And I think it's the way of the future. We hired a communication firm in New York, in Soho, on a pro bono contract. They were a little surprised when we asked them to sign for their $1 a year. But anyway, they came on board. They're called Naked Communication. And we asked them to work with us as this ancient organization to get us into the 21st century in terms of young people. And one of the conclusions they drew was that this segment of the population globally, irrespective of wealth of the country or anything else, the 29 and unders, no offense to anybody over that age in the room, I guess I'm speaking to those of you back there, the 29 and unders are the ones that are really going to transform their societies and global society. And I went away and I just thought, we needed a communication firm to tell us that, but I actually think there's great truth in that, and your question is very relevant for organizations like UNICEF to be able to tap into that when we're used to producing massive reports that sit on shelves and, our old way of doing business. We need a new way of doing business, and we're working on it.
The gentleman in the center in the purple sweater, burgundy? Sweater, shirt. It's on.
Hello. My question is, what can we do as individual citizens to help fight this? And after I asked this question, I just returned from Phnom Penh on Saturday, and I've been going there for 7 years now with nursing students. And I have several friends that have worked in the brothels that now work when we're there as interpreters. And I did talk one girl to coming out of the brothel. She was there on her own accord. And she came out and she wrote to me shortly after I left last January. I go 2 times a year now with students. And she came out and she said she's 32 years old and she went for a job at a restaurant. And she said, they told me I knew English very well, but I was too old and not pretty enough. And I don't know if citizens realize what we've done with our garment industry here. If you go back in your closets, I'm older, so when I look at my garments that I still have from my old high school days, they're made in the US. And if you can also see a transition of where we went with our garment industry, and every time we take the wages lower. So I'm wondering if you want to kind of address that, what we're doing to help traffic people by just buying always the cheapest.
So what can we do to help?
Yeah, that is a great question. A lot of people, when they knew about trafficking, they always feel very exciting to do something. Sometimes because they are too much exciting, they want too much thing. More you want too much thing, you do nothing. So for me, first of all, keep this okay, you want to help on the trafficking, to end sex trafficking, and then tell yourself if you are patient on that, and pick up and do it. So for me, do one thing by, first of all, telling to your friend around you, talking about this awareness, that they can get aware. Secondly, you can also, you can find many ways to help. It's not just going to Cambodia, to Thailand, working, but just go out and then helping the people in need around you. Maybe the poor people, that, because these poor people later on they can go to the sex trafficking industry, helping them, give them more education. So for me, every help, everyone can use your own experience, your own.
Yes.
What we're doing, not experience, your knowledge. You can use your own knowledge to help the people, and you can do it. And in Cambodia, of course, we have many NGOs who working not the same. Like our work, my work, our work is focused on the girl like 3 years old until 20, 22. Of course, sometimes we have older women that we help, but our focus ones. But we have also older NGO who focus on the, like CWCC, they focus on the women. And then you can come anytime to us, and then we can work together. We can, if one girl I cannot take, older NGO can take. Example, like girl who going to die for HIV/AIDS. In our NGO, we cannot take it because we have no space for them to die in the center. But we can work with older NGO who have specialized on that. So what we do, we do the best that we are specialized on, and we do it. And let the people, older people who specialize on and do it. Like UNICEF, you are specialized on how to set up the police for anti-trafficking, make investigation, law enforcement. And that is, so try do one thing, what you want exactly, not many things.
Can I say I really agree with Somaly on this, because and I think by showing up here tonight, you've done that one first thing, which is get yourself informed. But to speak specifically to your example of garments, it's part of that deeper level of information. So you can turn the TV on or read a newspaper, and you'll probably find a salacious story about a girl who's been trafficked into the sex industry. But that sort of deeper research and deeper understanding of how the things we eat, the things we buy, the things we do may underneath have some huge exploitative element to them. So that's one. And let me just say, related to that, and I only say this because I was living in Bangladesh for 5 years in the mid-90s with UNICEF, and there was a proposed boycott of the garment sector while I was there. And the AFL-CIO were up in arms, and this was around the issue of child labor in the garment sector. And true enough, there were between 10 and 200,000 kids in Dhaka in an industry that employed about 1.5 million women. And it's a very lucrative industry for Bangladesh. And the mere threat of a boycott sent kids out onto the streets from factories, fired overnight. Didn't get their paychecks, gone. Not that they were getting a lot of pay anyway. But the cautionary note is simply that unless systems are put in place, unless we get that basic infrastructure right, our emotional, our knee-jerk reaction, let's boycott, wouldn't have had the intended outcome anyway. What we would have done was put millions of women out of work, who as a result of working were getting married later in life, having their children later in life, and were really becoming empowered. So I guess my point is be informed, and you're already here, and take it to another level of information. And the second, also agreeing with Somaly, and I wanted to direct you to the UNICEFUSA.org website. There are 22 things they've listed, which, and this speaks to a national committee of UNICEF really being in the 21st century with social media and other things and reaching out to young people. But they have on their website 22 things, I think it's 22, that you can do when you get informed about this issue. And then I'll take it one step further and say political engagement is the next level. Write your congressman, write your senator, I'm Canadian, write your prime minister, whatever. There are things that can be done that need that kind of leadership from our political leaders.
I wanted to say something very quickly about political engagement, because I agree 100%. I think it's very important and also very timely, because this year there could be comprehensive immigration reform in the United States. We need to make sure that there's no erosion of the Victims of Trafficking Protection Act, and we need to make sure the protections for refugees, victims of trafficking, other people are preserved right here in our own country. So that's really important, and we had quite a fight over the Violence Against Women Act.
Yeah.
None of these things are secure. The United States takes a lead role in this, but it only takes a lead role because there's a lot of people pushing here. The other thing is there's going to be a lot of complaining and back and forth about the federal budget. The amount of money spent on these sorts of programs is minuscule, minuscule. A 1,000th of a percent of the federal budget. So I think also, you know, this next year, people can speak up and make their voices heard so that they know that these sorts of things need to be funded, they need to be important in U.S. foreign policy. And more than that, I mean, it's hard to find a more bipartisan issue right now in the United States. Neither party is very happy with 14-year-old girls being forced into prostitution.
We have a question up here in front, the lady in the pink sweater.
I recently got back from India, and I was fortunate enough to be there and work with bonded labor in Bangalore, and then also able to see the protest in Delhi. And with this violence that's it's been happening, but now that it's public, now that India is actually protesting against it, is this spearheading any more efforts? Is this aiding in you know, our desire to help these women and protect these women and children? And then also, my other question is the women.
Let's keep it to one because we've got a lot of people waiting to ask questions. Okay. So, the effect of the protests in India in terms of being able to actually address situations there.
Well, it's certainly helping. I mean, now, I want to say that, and then I want to say change is going to take a really long time. But the fact that there is this kind of public discourse for the first time is incredibly important. This is one of the most litigious societies I've ever lived in, and public interest litigation in India is hugely powerful. Civil society in India is hugely powerful. To wit, I'll give you one example. The midday meal program in India was legislated into the constitution because civil society actors stood up and said every kid needs this hot meal in every school. Lots of regulations around it I won't go into, but so I'm really optimistic. And then we are here in, not here in Chicago, in New York, we're plugged into a network with our country office, with OHC, the Office of the High Commission for Human Rights, with Jacqueline Baba at Harvard, who's part of a group of Indian scholars and legal scholars, and some people on the ground at the Hawk Center, which is the child rights that you probably came across them when you were in India. So there's a whole network of movement now that there has never been before. And I understand the front page of the Times of India a couple of days ago, the title was, and I felt personally offended because I was the head of child protection in India for 5 years, but anyway, it said, "There is no child protection in India." And I was actually happy to read that because I think you scratch the surface of the few things we were able to do while I was there. I think now there's the potential for a groundswell for change. But it is going to take time to change attitudes and minds and perceptions. We're going to be able to change laws pretty quickly, the rest of it, but we're in for the long haul, I think.
Let me ask quickly, Scott, Somaly, if there are any last comments that you'd like to make, because we really are running to the end of time, and I see so many questions out here, but I don't think that we can possibly deal with all of them. So do you have any last sort of wrap-up words that you'd like to offer this evening?
You know, just before I leave, I just want to share with all of you, because sometimes the people here, sometimes you don't appreciate your life here while you are lucky to be safe. And also children, you know, sometimes you are lucky, and then some people, they are not very appreciated. They just like, they get mad for nothing. And while you get very mad for nothing, and the kid and you in Cambodia, everywhere, they just need to feed, they need to eat, they need to survive. And I just want to share with you, you know, before I leave him, one of my girls, she's one of my heroes. She's 5 years old when I saved her from the brothel. She'd been stolen and raped in the brothel, and she got HIV/AIDS when I have her. All her hair is all leave her skin. And then when I brought her to the center, all the girls in the center, of course, they fear her because she's dirty. They say, "Oh, she's dirty, mommy, you have to bring her away." So I bring her to my house and bring her to the doctor. And the doctor tells me she has pneumonia, she has tuberculosis, and she has HIV/AIDS. And she's going to leave you. And they give me like 5-6 months, Somaly, we give her life. And look at her. I feel very sad because this kid needs to be cared. This kid, how suffering she was in the brothel or had been raped, you know. Look at her, I feel so stressed out. And I remember one night she looked at me, she told me, "Mommy, did you believe in God?" And I tell her, "Yes." And then she say, if you believe on God, if you have a real God, why I need to live, why I need to die? I have been just born and I have been sorrow. What I'm doing wrong in my life? And I just answer her that, you know, because we have God, otherwise they bring you to me. If not, maybe you die in the brothel. Day by loving, and then I have also a friend of mine that I don't know them, I just know them by emailing from Washington, D.C., Ruth what, I don't know. She write to me email about her, and a lot of people, they supporting her because they knew about her case. By loving, by warming the people visiting her, give her love. Today she's 11 years old, and then she survived, she's 5th grade. And you know what inspired to me, like, even she knew that she's going to leave, but she still have last hope for her. And then she always tell me, when you go somewhere, Mommy, can you tell everyone? And each of everyone can tell about her story. Few minutes of your pleasure, you kill me, and you kill my friends. So I just want to give it to you. She's happy now, she's surviving, but it's her word to everyone that you know, men, because some men do it, they don't realize that they make this girl die inside and try to survive. And sometimes we don't feel it, but this girl has been through this, and then they keep it in their heart, and then my last, I just want to make sure that everyone got it, and then tell to the people, educate the people to love each other, to appreciate their life. My girl, she's very appreciate her life. She never get complaint that she get HIV/AIDS. She tell me, Mommy, I'm happy. I have enough in my life. So don't get complaint because your mother don't call you for your birthday, because your mother don't, because it's too cold outside. Appreciate it and being happy in your life, and start help order. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it really is all the time that we have this evening. I know you'll agree that this is an incredibly important topic, and one where, as was said earlier, you've made that first step by being with us tonight. We hope to see you again at other Women in Global Development Forum programs at the Chicago Council. Thank you all for coming.